like on that spectrum, like what do you think, PulseChain?
Okay, best case scenario, we have developers that are enticed by the low fees, by Richard Hart's enthusiasm, by the community within the Hex community, and we see PulseChain become a top 10 layer one solution. We have a community behind it that has the potential to onboard new users. I mean, hell, like I've interviewed like 16 different projects already looking to launch on PulseChain. So, and this blockchain hasn't even launched yet. So the best case scenario, this layer one is adopted. It has a thriving ecosystem. It allows for third-party projects to embrace developers coming in, and we see a massive price valuation. The worst case scenario is that people think that PulseChain is irrelevant because of Ethereum 2.0, even though there's a 32 Ethereum gatekeeping right there for staking. But the worst case scenario, I think, is that we have a gatekeeping ethos in Hex. And I've seen this happen before, where third-party projects want to launch on a platform, but the pre-existing maximalists in the community refuse to accept them, and they just say, all right, screw you, I'm just going to go to another chain. My biggest fear for PulseChain is that it's just going to be a bunch of hexagons exchanging hands with PHEX, PulseChain, and PulseX, and the projects that are launching on it, like the projects that exist right now that are created predominantly from the Hex community. So that's my fear, is that maximalism is going to destroy it, or even worse, PulseChain launches prematurely. There's a crap load of bugs in it. And then, because we're already a reviled and gay-kept community in crypto, we see every single influencer in crypto going against PulseChain, outlining how it's a failure, and then PulseChain basically becomes like a isolated semi-ghost chain that's only relevant to hexagons. So that's the worst-case fear, in my opinion. And
so how do you fix the adoption thing, as far as it being saturated with hexagons and their projects? Is the NFTs solve that?
Does what solve that?
The NFTs solve that?
Did you say I'm sorry, NFTs?
NFTs, yeah. Like, do they solve that, like spreading it out, getting more people interested outside of our community?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you have a bunch of different NFT projects launching on PulseChain. You have NFTs on Pulse. You have Mintra. You have Pulseverse. You have the PulseXins creating their own PulseChain oriented ecosystem. You have Love.io, who actually just unboarded like 5 different NFT artists that wasn't even aware of PulseChain or Hex at the time. I think that the thing about NFTs, though, is that it's such a saturated market right now. Like, everyone can make an NFT, and anybody can make it on Solana, BSC, Ethereum, AVAX, any layer one you could think of. So I think that the uniqueness of NFTs isn't enough for PulseChain to be adopted. It helps. It'll definitely create a mind state. It'll definitely create, not a mind state. It'll definitely create an ethos of expansion. But we need more. We need unique projects. We need projects. Right now, I'm noticing a lot of projects I'm interviewing are projects that are just focused on Hex and PulseChain, that are just focused on the pre-existing community. And that's fine. But like, cryptocurrency projects, when they become echo chambers, it becomes dangerous, because then there's no justification for the influx of outside capital.
Yeah, so it's hard to bring new money in.
Yeah, I think that a lot of these new projects that launch need to be focused on getting new capital in, instead of just saying, okay, this whale is going to trade with this fish, and this fish is going to trade with this squid, and this squid's going to trade with this shark that's been in Hex for 2 years. Like, and I also think that Richard Hart's outrage marketing is working in a lot of ways. But I spoke about this with Fashion Coder. I'm not sure if the conservative, old school, like Christian demographic, with the money they have, are going to be enticed by like twerking and stuff like that. Like, yeah, like flexing is getting so much SEO optimization. You're seeing that. You're seeing a lot of people either hating or loving him, and regardless of the hate, they still follow him, which is giving Hex and PulseChain a lot of influence. But I think that once PulseChain and PulseX launches, the idealism needs to be more serious and more developmentally focused. Like I really think that right now we need to realize that PulseChain and PulseX, in order to garner mass adoption, is to actually become adopted. Yeah.
Well, so on the doubling the coins too, how do you think doubling coins of projects that are on Ethereum that may be more profitable to run on PulseChain, such as Decentraland, Mana, and all that stuff? Do you think that plays a role into getting people to come over? How well do you think that's going to work?
I think it's a very enticing prospect that these fees are much cheaper. We don't have to take a mortgage out for a transaction like on Ethereum. But the thing is, you have to be better than that, because there are layer ones out there that are extremely cheap in their transaction fees. Like there are those out there like cheap. Like, don't get me wrong, PulseChain's transactions are incredibly cheap, and that's an enticing prospect for a lot of developers that don't want to launch on Ethereum because it's just too damn expensive and their project would die. But you need to give them another value prospect besides that, in my opinion. It's a nice business pitch, but there needs to be more. There needs to be a realization that this community will adopt their project, this community will support their project, there's a user base, and like that's what I think. I think that PulseChain needs to be marketed. I think PulseChain needs to be, people need to be able to garner their niche. Like Richard Heart right now is doing the outrage marketing for retail investors that want to be like him, that want to have the money, that want to have the ability to garner any women they want. But there has to be those content creators that are more focused on other demographics, like the older generations or the more conservative generations, or those who may not have much money to even put in. Like what he's doing is fantastic, but unfortunately it's creating a lot of envy amongst traders that are just going to stay away from this project simply because of that. So I think that once PulseChain and PulseX launches, we really need to, as a community, create this force that entices all demographics.
Well, do you think on the doubling the coins too, do you think that a lot of the whales with the other coins, if those projects can work on PulseChain, that would be the leg up versus creating NFT, creating cheap transaction fees you get on all these other networks? Do you think the biggest pump-a-middle, the biggest thing that could take people over to PulseChain for adoption would be, hey, I got a ton of Mana, I got a ton of XYZ, and now I have influence in the community. Why don't we just switch over to PulseChain, see how it works, and then we use our coins over there. We get a market price. Like, I just don't see how that fails. It just doesn't seem like, what is the worst case scenario? Is the worst case like none of the coins are worth anything close to their value on ETH, and it's just a big joke? Like, what? I just see
Here's the best and worst case scenario.
Sure.
So the best case scenario is that these projects give PRC20s legitimate use case, legitimate utility that'll actually create a value proposition without just being a copy. So you have these projects that give these PRC20s utility. I also think that the prospect of forking these coins over to Ethereum, over to PulseChain, we need to prove to them that they can create value through their ERC20 tokens that are converted to PRC20s. Because if they're starting at zero, it's basically like someone saying to me, here is a bunch of Canadian pennies, here's a bunch of American pennies, here's a bunch of European pennies. I have to create value out of those things. Like, they have no value unless I make value out of them. So I think that more adoption needs to happen. I think more applications need to be launched that are geared towards PRC20 utilization. Because, like I said, I don't want to see, for example, like just PulseChain. What were we going to say?
I just want to say on that analogy, the pennies analogy, that's interesting, because what if you had, let's just say, hey, we're starting a new country, we're starting Libertarianville, and oh, you got all those US dollars, you get the same dollar, you get double your dollars, you can just get the same thing in Libertarianville. So now, aren't you going to be enticed to go check out, the new place because you got some money to spend there?
Oh yeah, I would be hugely enticed if it was actually worth $1. I would actually be hugely enticed.
Well, even if it was worth $100, wouldn't you still be like, well, I still got a lot of them. I wonder what I can buy there.
Yeah, definitely. I think it would definitely breed a lot of interest. I do. I definitely think it'll breed a lot of interest. If you have a crap load of mana, or if you have a crap load of any ERC20, and you see opportunity where you can garner some capital, garner some fresh capital from that money, from the PRC20s, of course, absolutely. But I think there has to be an avenue from our network to go outside of our network. I see Hex as being a very, 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 and this is a good thing in a lot of ways, a tight niche community. But I also think that tribalism only goes so far. Like, civilization works and operates the way it does now because cultures are interconnected. Civilizations are interconnected. Tribes, if you will, are interconnected. That needs to happen with Hex and PulseChain. Like that needs to happen. And that's why I'm doing it. That's why personally I'm doing my channel with different projects. And like you said, you're interested in other projects as well. You got to bring people in. You have to, and you can give them all of these pitches, and you can also give them all of these enticing prospects. And there's a big chance that it'll be adopted from that. But I think that we need to stop gatekeeping ourselves. That's the important prospect here.
I certainly hope so. I certainly hope we're able to build these bridges, have these people come over because they see this value, not because, there's smoke and mirrors, because they see it makes sense to come over to PulseChain. And I want to take my project there. I want to tell my people about it. I want to make sure that PulseChain is not gatekept, and it's not gatekept from the inside out either. It makes a lot of sense, man. That was a great, I definitely like to dig into some of those points. I think we hit some pretty good ones there.